тобой все будет все в порядке.
Нормально. Закрой эту.
Natalie's anger is like an unattended hose on full blast. It's just unleashing hell on anyone that steps close to her. But in the cold light of day, she begins to come to her senses. She begins to realise who her fury should actually be focused on.
Josh, you're whore. Low class, low key whore.
Okay.
You everything that works. I cannot be next to you because I'm afraid to catch something.
There you go, that's what I'm talking about. I much prefer seeing this version of Natalie than the one who's always woe is me. Boo-hoo, why is life so unfair? But before we get into all of that, and there's a lot to get into, let's pick up where we left off. So, the last we saw them, Natalie had just thrown a drink at Sophie and ended up squaring off with Jasmine. And when we join them in this episode as Jasmine has gone back into the club, she's more than happy to air her views about Natalie to anyone that will listen.
That bitch is crazy. What did she do? She said, you started, you fix it. You started? How did you start?
You had girl code.
Look, Jasmine did know what she was doing, right? She wanted the drama. She didn't need to tell Natalie, it wasn't her business to do so, but at the same time she felt that Natalie had a right to know. Now, if Natalie had taken that information and digested it correctly, if she'd directed her anger at the man who deserved it rather than lashing out at everyone else, well, then others may have been on her side. There might be a bit more sympathy for her. But as it now stands, because of how she acted, there's very limited pity for her. In fact, the only person who eventually, and it does take a while, but the only person who eventually shows any consideration for Natalie's well-being is, ironically, someone that Natalie has been quite bitchy towards, and that's Julia.
So I saw this measurement.
Julia, я с ним встречаюсь 3 года, он меня не пригласил. Да, он какую-то проститутку приглашается за неделю, какого
Natalie's just so angry that she doesn't seem able to control who she directs that anger towards. Like whether it's Jasmine or Sophie or now Julia that she screams at. The truth is, none of them have done anything that deserves that kind of reaction. Like take Sophie for example, right? She claims she didn't even encourage Josh's DMs. Heck, she was even telling Rob about them. So that being the case, what's Natalie's problem?
Не кричи на меня, не кричи на меня. Просто определись, нужен ли такой тебе мужик. Если нет, бай, иди на все.
Exactly! That is precisely what Natalie should do. And the fact is, she's been told this numerous times from numerous different people. Natalie herself knows by now that Josh treats her like crap. He's never really treated her like a serious girlfriend. But instead of dumping him like a normal person would, she just keeps clinging on. It doesn't make sense. And maybe, just maybe, when she's alone in bed reflecting on everything that's just happened, maybe she'll finally realise what she needs to do.
С тобой все будет все в порядке.
Нормально. Закрой эту.
Now, as Natalie goes home, right, Josh takes a minute to himself. And look, here's the thing. For as much as I've been laying into Natalie for her shocking behaviour, right, and I stand by everything I've said, but for as much as I've said about her, the truth is, it's Josh who's the real villain here. He leads Natalie on, right? He promises her this future when in reality we can all see it's lies. He has no intention of settling down with her, having kids with her. What he's doing at this point is cruel. He needs to stop wasting her time. He needs to put her out of her misery. And to make matters worse, in a move that really doesn't sit well with me, Josh now begins to try and paint Natalie out as the bad guy.
This is what happens. Natalie gets like this, and that was the whole point of coming here, was to see if this is the part that we could break. This habit, this cycle of this explosion.
Has Natalie exploded? Yes, she has, but what Josh is doing here almost feels like gaslighting. Like, he claims that Natalie blew these DMs out of all proportion. He now blames their bad relationship on Natalie's blow-ups. Like, suddenly it's all Natalie's fault. He's just the victim here. But there's zero accountability from him. He's not taking any responsibility for his actions that hurt her in the first place. And when we join him the next day, Josh is getting ready to leave the resort. Remember, he's been allowed to leave for family time, something he didn't even have the respect to tell Natalie about.
Last night, I went back to the hotel. I definitely had to have my own room because right now, there's no way I'm staying in the room with Natalie.
Josh treats Natalie like he's not even in a relationship with her. He treats her like a stranger. Okay, Josh, maybe you didn't want to share a room with her last night, right? Okay, but then what's your excuse for not showing her your house in the last 3 years? Like, you don't need to be a genius to realise Josh has some very serious misgivings about Natalie. And what he says next really proves that.
She needs to learn how to be normal. Like, serious. She needs to learn how to be normal and how to interact with normal people.
Now, does Josh have a point? Well, yes, he does, right? Natalie can't seem to function normally in social settings. We've seen it with our own eyes. She has this habit, doesn't she? She gets too emotional or too defensive or more than likely too dramatic. But the thing is, if he doesn't even see his partner as normal, quote unquote, then how's he expected to love her? It's a very telling slip of the mask, isn't it? It shows us how he really feels towards her. Like, I'm sorry, but that side of Natalie is something that someone who really loved her would have to learn to accept. That's just who she is. Only when he drops by her room to say goodbye, his attitude is more one of someone who wants to point out where she is going wrong.
I see a situation that was blown out of proportion. I think it could have been handled much differently.
When it was created, you messaged the girl.
Okay, there's some progress. Natalie has at least moved away from calling Sophie a fucking whore, which I guess is nice. But when asked to account for his behaviour, Josh tries to claim that he only ever messaged Sophie as a friend, and Natalie is sick of hearing his excuses.
Josh, you're a whore. You're a whore. Low class, low key whore.
Okay.
You everything that works. I cannot be next to you because I'm afraid to catch something.
Finally, she's directing her anger at the person who deserves it. And I've got to say, it's nice to see Natalie angry at Josh for once, rather than what she normally does, which is just to whine about how he treats her. But, unfortunately for her, this anger isn't going to get her anywhere, because Josh shuts her down and just leaves.
So, listen, I gotta go. Good luck with everybody. I hope that you apologize to everybody because they deserve it.
And that's that, at least for a few days. They may be at the resort, but Josh is off, right? They're not going to be able to work on their issues. But here's the thing. Ironically, this may be exactly what Natalie needs. This may actually be a blessing in disguise. You see, without Josh there, Natalie now has her own space, her own time to reflect on herself. She needs to try and figure out why she is the way she is, why she keeps repeating the same mistakes over and over again. And to help her with that, she actually books a private therapy session.
So I called James to have a therapy session. I feel like I'm overwhelmed emotionally and I'm coming for help.
Now, in recounting what happened last night, Natalie actually admits that she had somewhat of an emotional breakdown. As she fills James in on all the drama, right, James actually goes as far as to completely validate Natalie. He says to her, hearing that your boyfriend has invited another woman behind your back to go to Vegas must have been a lot for you to take.
What was that like hearing that?
Sorry.
Don't apologize. That's a lot to take in. That's a lot to hear.
For the first time, someone is actually comforting Natalie. Sure, the girls have all told her to dump Josh, and in general, none of us have had any pity for her because her problems seem so self-inflicted. But for once, right, this therapist is giving Natalie what she actually needs. He's giving her validation. He's saying it's okay that you felt hurt in that moment. And as it turns out, the fallout from everything that's happened has had some pretty upsetting consequences for Natalie.
I felt like I made some friends, but yesterday incident kind of took them from me. I'm afraid that when I enter the room, I will have a group of enemies.
Now, James feels like Natalie's reactions to the group, her difficulty in fitting in and her fear of them, actually comes from something deeper. He thinks that this all stems from experiences from her past, and after a little bit of digging, he manages to uncover that Natalie was severely bullied as a child.
I was not loved by kids in my school. Like one time girl, we were sitting at class and she got a lot of chewing-gums. She was eating them and cutting them and throwing to my hair.
This incident meant that Natalie had to cut off most of her hair, and that might explain why today, now as an adult, she prefers it so long. And Natalie goes on to say, tragically goes on to say, that as she was growing up, being hated by other kids became normal for her. No one liked me, she says, and that, maybe that, gives us some inkling of where her aggressive behaviour in a group now today comes from.
It took me a while to build healthy friendship with women because I was bullied by them many years.
You got so upset with Sophie instead of dealing with your relationship with Josh.
Recounting these memories and this realisation suddenly makes Natalie feel very emotional. It feels like progress. For the first time, she's actually not just admitting but confronting issues that could actually lead to her changing her behaviour rather than putting a band-aid on it. She's taken the first step in realising why she acts the way she does. Why she chose to lash out at all the women last night because of that little girl inside her constantly having to fight.
And I have to fight for love. I have to prove I deserve to be loved.
The belief that I would like to see for you would be related to I am good enough.
If Natalie begins to feel like she deserves love, then maybe she might be able to walk away from her relationship with Josh. But, says the therapist, if you're serious about trying to make things work with Josh, then at the very least, as a first step, you should open up to him. You should explain your past to him so that he can have a better understanding of why you are the way you are.
I think it's important that you trust Josh. I feel like Natalie needs to do some significant work on past childhood traumas and how that affects her behaviors today.
And James goes on to say that in a similar way to what I encourage you to do with Josh, you should also open up to the group as well. He wants Natalie to apologise to the group for her behaviour and to also begin tearing down those walls that she's put up to isolate herself. And while to James's face, Natalie agrees to this, privately, it seems to be a completely different story.
And I know everybody's hate me right now. I was a monster yesterday and I should apologize. But honestly, I don't give a
So maybe this therapy session wasn't the breakthrough that we thought it was. Did Natalie just go to the therapist to try and get some sympathy? I mean, if she isn't willing to take the steps needed, the steps she agreed to take to mend her relationship with Josh and mend her relationship with the group, then at that point, what's the value of her even being here? Perhaps it's time for her to also pack her bags and leave.